But what about the living Jews? What about people like me? What about people that feel like they cannot even walk safely in their own streets?
Welcome to What Came After. I'm your host, Manya Marcus. On What Came After, we'll take a look at the many ways that people's lives changed on and after the brutal massacre in Israel on October 7th, 2023. We'll be speaking with people in Israel and around the world about how the devastating attack by Hamas has shifted, shaped, and changed them. To learn more about our podcast, please visit us at whatcameafter.com. I am so honored to be here with Juan, who will share with us his many names in just a moment. It is January 30th, 2025. We are commemorating the liberation of Auschwitz, which took place a few days ago, the 80th anniversary. And we are in the middle of the first phase of the hostage exchange. Thank God a few more of our hostages came back today. So, Juan, I would love for you to introduce yourself. Tell us all your names, what they mean, and also if you could share with us where we are here in beautiful Brussels.
Well, first of all, welcome to the headquarters of the European Jewish Association in the city of Brussels, capital of Belgium, the home, as we say, and the heart of the EU bubble of the European democracy. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast today. My name is Juan Caldes. My Jewish name, I will get into my Jewish journey, is Benjamin Ben Abraham. And I'm the European Advocacy Coordinator here at the European Jewish Association, where our main focus is to combat antisemitism in all of its forms and also to foster Jewish life in the European continent.
You and I have a lot to talk about. This is a really difficult moment in our history, but you have been doing this work since before October 7th. Mm-hmm. And as we spoke just before the interview, you were saying that you have been in a bit of an intensified pace since that day. Can you tell us what your work looked like before October 7th and then how it has changed or accelerated since?
Of course. So I have to say it's extremely different than what it used to look like. Not that it was not as hectic, because unfortunately, even before October 7th, we still had a lot of work to do in terms of fighting anti-Semitism in all of its forms, as I mentioned before. But it is true that it was a bit different because we could focus a bit more on the component of fostering Jewish life on the continent. And the moment that everything exploded on October the 7th, we knew right from the get-go, as soon as we started to see those horrific images from the Hamas terrorists coming into Israel, that for us as Jews in the diaspora, and for those of us who work in major Jewish organizations, there's the two fronts. There's the multi-front war that is being fought right now in the Middle East between Israel and all the seven enemies, and the other one, which is a diplomatic one. And this is the one that we as Jews in the diaspora that we have to deal with, especially the past year, 2024, the whole year of 2024. It was horrific. In our own building where we are right now, for example, just a couple of weeks after October the 7th, we had a bomb threat alert in our building and we had to be evacuated. And Baruch Hashem, nothing major happened. But nonetheless, it was very scary. So after that, we had to have private security, which to this day we still have in our building. And that was just one of a million experiences that I could share with you. The first couple of months after October the 7th, we received a lot of warnings. We had to be very careful going to synagogue just for Shabbat services. The first 2 weeks, they really did recommend us not to go. Parents that were very, very scared to bring their own kids to school, which would be one of the safest things to do. And people were removing their mezuzot 80 years after the liberation of Auschwitz. One would think that we would know better, especially in this continent out of all places, where we saw 1/3 of the Jewish population being decimated in less than 15 years. One would think that anti-Semitism would be something of the past, but it's not. It's very much alive. It's kicking. And especially in Western countries where we're at, like in Belgium, we have a very severe situation that we have to deal with before it's too late.
How would you define that situation?
I would say that right now, I try to make a differentiation between Western Europe and in Eastern Europe, and I'll get into it. In Eastern Europe, what I see personally from all the times that I've been there since October the 7th, and I've been to a few countries, because as a European Jewish organization, we represent hundreds of Jewish communities all over the continent. When I had meetings with our partners on the ground, such as in Estonia or Latvia or Poland, etc., I have to say, it's not that anti-Semitism doesn't exist. It's everywhere in society, unfortunately. But it's not as prevalent as it is in Western Europe. When I'm walking through the streets of Riga, of Tallinn, of Warsaw, of Sarajevo, of Belgrade, or of any other city in Eastern Europe, I feel a lot safer than I do in Western Europe. When I'm walking through the streets of Brussels, Amsterdam, London, Paris, Barcelona, in my own home country in Spain, I do not feel as safe. And I would not even dare to wear a kippah after October the 7th. I don't do it. And before that, I used to do it, especially in Spain, in Barcelona, for example, which is a city that I used to visit quite often. And I wouldn't feel that sentiment of, wow, something's going to happen to me any time of the day. Whereas right now, when we are in Western Europe, we do feel that way. That responds to a pattern, in my opinion, of the demographics of how it's changing in Europe. I would never want to generalize, but I have to say that unfortunately, the vast majority of the cases that we're seeing right now of anti-Semitism through the lens of anti-Zionism, they do come from a certain group, which is radical, second and third generation, by the way, young Muslims in these countries that I've mentioned before, in which they do not want to seek any sort of coexistence with Jewish neighbors. And I think that that is a big problem that Europe has to face sooner or later. And that also explains why, at the European level, we see all of these changes in Germany now with the upcoming elections, in France with an incredible crisis that they have, the beginning of La Cinquième République. And we see many other countries that are following that pattern. So Europe, it is at a crossroads in which it is fighting for its very existence. And I always try to say that it reminds me of Israel in a way, because at the end of the day, Israel is that bastion of freedom and democracy in the Middle East because of the Judeo-Christian and Greco-Roman values that we share, treasuring Jerusalem, Athens, and Rome, the capital of democracy, the capital of the rule of law, and the capital of monotheism. And if we do not protect and cherish that, it might be a bit too late. So it is our moment. Now it's not too late still, even though we see higher numbers of people making Aliyah.
And this means immigration to Israel for anyone who doesn't know.
Exactly. So if you want to make Aliyah to come to our Jewish homeland, after 2,000 years, it should be a cause of hope, something happy, not based on fear. And as of right now, we see quite on the contrary. Here in Europe and the US and Canada and other places, it's coming mostly from a place of fear. And again, thank God that we do have the state of Israel in case that there's a persecution. But how sad that it is coming from a place of fear instead that out of a place of joy.
There are new dynamics in this crisis, certainly than there were during the Shoah. During the Holocaust, anybody who was Jewish was brought to slaughter. Here, there are different levels of belonging and visibility, right? It seems like it's particularly frightening to go into public if you are visibly Jewish. You can put your mezuzah inside the door, but if you have it outside, you're announcing who you are. You were not born into this situation. You took this very complicated identity on. Can you tell us a little bit about your background Jewishly?
Yes, absolutely. So I do not have the quote unquote the common Jewish journey because I was not born into a Jewish family. So in my case, I was born and raised in a very Catholic family in Spain, in Palma de Mallorca, where I'm originally from. And as everyone knows, Spain is, traditionally speaking, a very Catholic country. And in my case, what happened is that I was a devout Catholic for 18 years. And then my father, in one of our conversations, told me that my great grandpa, who used to work back in the day for the Franco regime, for those who might not know, Spain had a dictatorship that lasted for 35 years with General Franco from 1940 until 1975. This year we marked 50 years since he passed away and Spain gained its democracy and its freedom again. And my great grandpa, who was working for the Franco regime, who was a devout Catholic himself, found out that we had Jewish roots and that we were Sephardic. And he managed to trace it. This was during the 60s. So obviously tracing it is not like now. So it took him years. And then he found out that we had those Jewish roots. Our last name, Caldes, was a Sephardic last name. And in the Jewish quarter, for example, in Palma, where I'm from, you can still see that there's a street called Caldes. And that's where my last name comes from Caldes, because many of the last names were associated to their professions. So mine was from caldereros, which is iron makers. And after that conversation with my father, I started to have some doubts. And 2 years later, I told him that I really wanted to visit Israel, especially Jerusalem, as a holy city to the three big monotheistic religions. And the moment that I was at the Kotel for the first time and I was praying, I don't know how to explain it because it was a spiritual transformation, but I felt something as I was praying. And then I just felt like that the rest of my life had changed completely, even though I couldn't completely process it in that moment, in that exact moment. And then I abandoned my Catholic faith and my Catholic life. I moved to Israel, where I started to study law. after I finished my studies in the US, in the city of Boston. And the moment that I was living in Israel, I started to go to Shabbat dinners every Friday. I started to get a bit more involved. I started to read about Judaism on my own. And then one day I decided it was the right moment to fully embrace those roots and to do a giur. And I told my family that I was living officially the Catholic faith after 22 years. And after that moment, I knew that it was the time to come back home. And then I went through this giur that took me many years.
Giur means conversion for anyone who doesn't know.
Yes, correct. I finished it years ago, and now I'm a full member of Am Israel. And I have to say, for me, it was not just a giur. For me, it was a return to my roots because I'm a descendant of a family of Marranos. Many people, still to this day, they're starting to finally discover their roots, and they're starting to see that they have Jewish roots and they don't know what to do with that. In my case, I decided to go back to those roots. I'm the first person in my family, after hundreds of years, to go back to those Jewish roots. My family to this day is still Catholic.
Can you tell us what Marranos are? Some
Yes.
people might not know.
No, of course. So the Marranos are those people that after the Spanish Inquisition, with the Edict of Expulsion from 1482, when Jews had three choices, either you could stay, but you had to convert by force, you could leave, but very few people could do that, or you would get killed. Marranos in Spanish is a very derogatory term to refer to those Jews that converted by force, because Marranos is associated to a marrano, to a pig, in the sense that historically we've associated pigs to being very dirty animals. So it was a very derogatory term to refer to those Jews. But now if I say marrano, it's actually quite on the contrary. I'm very proud to say that those are my roots. And right now I could not imagine my life without Judaism and Zionism.
You took on a spiritual identity as a Jew. I'm not sure if you were aware that you were taking on a sociological identity as well. I think the story of Jews through the end of the 20th century is that we integrate and then we are expelled. Integration and then expulsion.
Mm-hmm.
This is certainly very true in Spain and Portugal, Spain where you're from. And here you are now really fighting for Jews to have a place in Europe, a place where they were integrated and then expelled. You lived in Israel. You had your transformative moment at the Kotel, the Western Wall.
Mm-hmm.
Why is it important to you, and why should it be important for other people that there is a thriving Jewish community on this continent?
Well, first of all, because you cannot understand the history of Europe without the contribution of Judaism. At the end of the day, Judaism is intrinsically connected to Europe, to European history. We've been on this continent for 2,000 years, for a very long time. So it's not like we just came back, 2 generations ago. We've been here for a long time, in spite of everything that has happened. For me, the best example to understand the Jewish contribution to Europe can be found in the late 19th century and early 20th century, especially during the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the city of Vienna. Most of the intellectuals were Jewish. Stefan Zweig, Joseph Roth, Franz Kafka was from Prague, but he was belonging to that group of Jews and intellectuals
In Vienna.
And some of the people that have changed the way we think, for better or for worse, were Jewish. Karl Marx himself was Jewish, Freud, and the list goes on. So this continent cannot be understood without the Jewish contribution in all of its fields, in medicine, in psychology, in political science, in political thought, in philosophy, in literature. It cannot be understood. So what I always say is that not only we're part of that European continent, but we're the future. We should be the future. So I think that our job as European Jews that we are, not Israeli, because that's one of the main things that I always try to say to people who have never met someone who's Jewish on the continent, that I'm not Israeli. I love Israel. I'm a proud Zionist. I'm never going to be ashamed of saying that publicly, and I will always fight to defend the state of Israel as I do in my day-to-day work. But at the end of the day, I'm a European Jew. I'm both. And that's what I try to explain to people, that it's not about choosing one over the other. It's not incompatible to have those two identities, even though we live in a world that has to be black or white. So in our case, the most important thing that we should try to aim for is to be as integrated as we are without having to assimilate, which is something that people don't understand. I think there's a lot of misconceptions with those two concepts, and people usually mix them in.
Yeah, integration and assimilation.
Correct.
How would you differentiate them
For
us?
me, very clearly, as a European Jew, I'm integrated into the fabric, into the European fabric, into the society, meaning we've adopted the customs, we've adopted the European culture, the lifestyle, the languages that we speak, all of that, from the way that we dress to the way that we speak, many other things. But from a religious / cultural point of view, we still keep certain traditions. How we eat with kosher, to how we pray, to how we keep the festivities, the Hagim, the holidays. I feel like there should be a fair balance between those two, which I don't think is that difficult. And even though we still struggle in some countries, we have freedom of religion.
So I'll ask you a question, and I think it's going to be an opportunity to get a little bit more into the work that you do here. What do you say to somebody who says to you, look, the contributions of the Jews across Europe has been enormous, and Europe has just chewed us up and spit us out. We need to be in Israel. I am so curious what your response to that would be, and also how it intersects with the work that you're doing in this really beautiful building.
So as I mentioned before, the process of making Aliyah, it's a very personal decision. Baruch Hashem 1,000,000 times that we have the state of Israel in case that once again things get really, really bad. Right now, it's a critical year because we see that the situation is quite bad. It really is. But we're not at the stage in which we were during the 1930s. We're not there yet. We might, but we're not there yet. That is very important to say. So again, the process of making Aliyah is a very personal choice that I think should be coming from a place of joy. That's one. And outside of that, in our line of work, in what we do, I'm not going to deny that there are days that it is extremely difficult to constantly fight against something that and you just don't see it going anywhere. All of us as European Jews, we've had those moments throughout the past year and a half. Do we really see a future for ourselves or not? I myself, as a 27-year-old, for the younger generations, do we see a future for our kids? Do we see sending our kids to Jewish schools, to the synagogues, to Jewish camps safely? Is that even going to be something that is going to happen in the next 20 to 50 years?
Well, you're asking all my questions for me, so thank you.
It is a very legitimate question. And right now, as we are approaching, in May, we'll have our annual conference of Jewish leaders that we do every year when hundreds of Jewish leaders from the continent come. And it's a moment to not just network, but also to discuss how the situation is in each country. And this is something that is going to be very much discussed. Is it the moment to officially bail and leave? Or is it the moment to still stay and fight? Again, that's a very personal choice. In my case, I'm one of those that still believes that we should stay in the continent because if we all left, I personally believe that the situation would get a lot worse. And also it would be a great victory for the enemy because the people that hate us from the far right, from the far left, with different motives, they have one objective, which is to eliminate us. One might be through actual physically destroying us. And the other one might be through saying, listen, just go to Israel. All of you have your state, thrive in there, but have your ethno state, quote unquote, and stay there and don't bother us because this is not your continent, this is your not home, and you're never going to be part of that European society. And I don't believe in that. So I think we have every right to stay here. In my case, I feel extremely connected to this continent. No matter where I'm at, no matter if I'm in Estonia or in Portugal, completely different countries, I still do feel like I'm in Europe. And I'm very proud of that. So I think that we have a lot of work to do. That is just a fact. Hopefully the situation will get a bit better. Everything that happens to the diaspora is very much affected to the current situation in the Middle East, which is also a pity because the new form of antisemitism through anti-Zionism, one of them is holding all Jews accountable for what might happen in Israel. You don't do that with any other country, but you just so happen to do it to Jews. So if the situation gets better and we get back into that track in which the state of Israel was very close to reaching that historic agreement with Saudi Arabia and following that path of the Abraham Accords, I think the situation might get better for us here. But nonetheless, we're very much aware of all the internal and external enemies that we have, especially at the political level, from the far right and the far left. And that just gives us even more inspiration to keep working and fighting for the right cause, which is that Jews are an intrinsic part of this continent and that we're not going anywhere.
You're presenting a really strong ethos and politic of the diaspora. I appreciate that a lot. In terms of the signs that it's time to leave, what was your emotional experience? And then what was your professional experience of the pogrom in Amsterdam that occurred a few months ago?
So that was a terrible day, November the 7th of 2024, just a bit after we were commemorating that 1-year anniversary of October the 7th. I remember when I woke up, it was Friday. It was just before Shabbat. It happened throughout Thursday night after the game between Maccabi Tel Aviv and Ajax, the football game that took place in Amsterdam. And I remember waking up and reading the news, first thinking about my Jewish friends that live in Amsterdam, to whether they were okay or not. It was just horrific. We never thought that we would get to a stage in which we would actually see a live pogrom in the 21st century. And not just in any place. Amsterdam, which is well regarded by many people as one of the most progressive and cosmopolitan cities in Europe, or at least that's what they claim to be, or that's what it used to be 20, 30 years ago. And to see the state of Israel having to send a plane to rescue Israeli citizens, I thought that it was beyond appalling and beyond surreal. I never thought I would have to witness that. And it was a strong sign that things are getting really out of control. And this is what happens when politicians at the local, at the regional, at the national level, when they don't take strong measures and actions. And that's why I mentioned that this is a critical year. 2025 is a critical year. Last year, we saw 35,000 people making Aliyah, mostly from Europe and the US. 35,000, that is a lot of people, given that we are less than 20 million Jews in the world.
And you think more out of fear than anything?
Absolutely. And I think that there's going to be more people that are going to make Aliyah in the coming year, especially in countries where the situation is worse, like France. France, which has the largest Jewish population in the continent, I think we're going to see more and more cases of people, especially from cities like Marseille, Paris, and others, making Aliyah. It's just a fact, especially for the younger generations. Because the older generations, when I speak to them, people that might be in their 60s or 70s or 80s, it's a bit different because they've had their whole lives here. So it's a bit different to leave. But younger people that have their whole lives ahead of them, they want to be able to build a life. And if they don't see a future and hope, and it's not just because of the economic situation or the political situation, merely from an anti-Semitic point of view, if they don't see that their own governments can guarantee their safety, then what future do we have in this continent? So, as I mentioned before, it's not too late. There are ways to do it. But the other day, as I was listening through all the commemorations that we've had in this past week with International Holocaust Remembrance Day, we keep saying Leolam Lod, never again, we remember. But this should not be a one-day occasion. This should be something that we act on every single day of the year. And to me, it's not enough to see politicians just coming in with their empty words and promises by saying that never again is now and that we're fully with the Jewish community. To me, it seems like they're more with dead Jews than they are with living Jews. Because to honor and to remember, it's a moral duty for Jews and non-Jews alike. But what about the living Jews? What about people like me? What about people that feel like they cannot even walk safely in their own streets? So I think that the governments, it's part of that social contract to protect us. And not just Jews, but any other citizen, obviously. There are ways to do it. In Europe, for example, we have a commissioner that is dedicated to the work of fighting against anti-Semitism. And in her case, along with national governments in the 4 last years, many national plans have been produced to combat anti-Semitism. Some of those national plans are extraordinary and very, very good, such as the one that the Netherlands produced after the pogroms of November 7th, or Luxembourg already did. But there are other national plans that are really not good at all.
Do you mean that they're weak or that
they're extremely weak, because they fail to see the problems of the current world. And the reality is that 90% of the times, anti-Semitism comes through anti-Zionism. That's just a fact. Most people in today's world, they cannot afford to say anything against Jews per se, because right away they will be associated to Hitler, to neo-Nazis, to the Holocaust. No one wants to be associated to that unless you are a hardcore, proud neo-Nazi. And we know that that's a tiny minority, thank God. But the vast majority of people, they will do it in a very sophisticated manner. They will do it through the lens of anti-Zionism, by denying that right of existence to the Jewish people, or by holding accountable Jews for everything that is wrong in society, or we can see it with the war all the time, on and on. Constantly, people will say that, wow, after everything you guys went through, especially 80 years ago, how could you be doing the same to the Palestinians in Gaza? And I'm not getting now into the whole war, into the whole situation, which could take us many hours to discuss.
New podcast. Yes,
yes, absolutely. Round 2. It is beyond disgusting to do that comparison. And so right now we see that critique mainly comes from a place, not just of ignorance, but actual malice and evil. But as I mentioned before, in the case from the far left parties that we see, and some of them are actually in power, like in my country, in Spain, we see that they do it in a very sophisticated and smart way by saying, no, we're not against the Jewish community. We love Jews. We love Jewish culture. We love Jewish religion. But we do have a problem with the state of Israel. And the double standards that we have against Israel, we don't have them against anyone else. Why is that? So that responds to the old patterns of how anti-Semitism has evolved, as Lord Rabbi Sachs explained. First, it was the persecution through the lens of religion. The Spanish Inquisition was a prime example. Then it was the so-called race that Hitler talked about. With the Dreyfus case, we saw it as well. And then now, since 1948, it's through the persecution of the nation state of Israel.
And I'll add that I think that we were a target of Soviet communism for quite some time. So you do see in America Jews who are very proud to be in the pro-Gaza encampments. They're out in the streets. It cannot be assumed now that a Jew is not an anti-Zionist. I wonder if you think that most anti-Zionists, I'll say non-Jewish anti-Zionists, understand their own feeling and conviction to be anti-Semitic, or do you think that that is something that they are denying within themselves?
That is a very, very good question. I'll say the following. I don't think that every single anti-Zionist out there might be anti-Semitic, even though I do think that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. The main problem in today's world is that we use big words without actually knowing what it means. We first have to define what Zionism is. What is Zionism? Zionism is nothing more than the right of self-determination of the Jewish people to have their own state in their own ancestral homeland. That's what Zionism is. I think that that's the example that we should follow, especially for people like outgoing President Biden, who used to say, my whole life, I've been a proud Zionist. As a Catholic man that he is, as a devout Catholic, because he knew what it entailed and what it meant to be a Zionist. I think that there are a lot of people out there, especially the younger generations, that are very much indoctrinated on not even the pro-Palestinian. I don't like to say that because I don't like to use the words pro-Israel and pro-Palestine. I think you can be both. The problem is that right now, what we see is that there are a lot of people that, again, are waving the Palestinian flags, the keffiyehs, and many other stuff. They don't even know what it actually means. So what I try to do, even though it might seem very simple, is that when I have certain conversations with those individuals that I've had since October the 7th, very plainly say, do you even know what Zionism is? Let's just start the conversation. Do you even know what it means? And once you explain to them what it is, they're like, actually, I do believe in that. Okay, welcome to the club. You're a Zionist. You see, it's nothing bad to be a Zionist. And you need to understand the root of the cause. You need to understand the definition. You need to understand what it means, what it entails. So,
well, part of this is about who gets to define it.
Of course.
Right? And it should be us.
Of course, absolutely. Absolutely.
But, yeah.
Just like we would not take that away from any other minority. If any other minority was defining what X, Y, or Z you choose, what it could be, I would not come out and pretend to know better than they do. At the end of the day, we have suffered, not to play the victim card, but it's not about who owns a monopoly of suffering, but we have suffered a lot. And to this day, I think we should be granted the right to express and to explain to the world what Zionism is, I think, not from the international bodies and the international institutions.
I don't want to interrupt you, but I will say that one of the most bizarre things about this post-October 7th world for me is that Jews are not considered reliable narrators of their own experience. It's been a little disturbing, but I want you to go back to
No, and following with that, what you said, I completely agree. I think that the main problem in today's world is that everything is divided between not just black and white, but between oppressor and oppressee. We've built a narrative about that, about the perpetrator and the victim for everything, regardless of how situations might be very complex and great. No, it has to be that way. And for some reason, Jews are part of the category in which they are white colonizers and imperialists. That's what we're part of. We're part of the privileged group, so-called privilege. We're not good enough no matter what we do, because in the 1930s, we were too communist. But then the communists were saying that we were too capitalist. You see, we're constantly being attacked one way or another. So you have to laugh because it's how we cope in our religion with Jewish humor. But at the same time, it is tragic, the fact that no matter what, apparently we get it wrong. And in today's world, we are privileged white colonialists. And the colonialist one is my favorite one, because if you study the history of colonialism and imperialism and you see the Jewish people going back to their ancestral homeland, where archaeologically you can prove that we lived there 3,000 years ago, how could that be colonialism? The opposite of colonialism is going back to your indigenous land, is going back to your roots. So even if you try to explain all of this, it is very difficult to change that narrative, especially in the university bubble. That's how it is. In the case of European Jews, I have to say the vast majority of them are very proud Zionist Jews. Of course, you find anti-Zionists everywhere, but the vast majority are not like that. I still do believe that the vast majority of people in America are Zionist Jews, but here's the problem. People that are 40, 50 and above are proud Jews and Zionists. But people that are 15 to 35, and you see it in all the statistics, they're less connected and they want to be less associated to the Zionist component because they want to fit. You can be Jewish, but the moment that you say you're a Zionist, you're no longer part of it. And that is something that I experienced myself when I was going to certain conversations from an interfaith point of view. I could go as a Jew with Christians, Muslims, and many others. But the moment that I would talk about how I was a Zionist, I would be excluded by certain people. And I'm sorry, but for the vast majority of Jewish people everywhere in the world, from Australia to Chile to South Africa to Europe to the US to Canada, the vast majority of people are intrinsically connected to Zionism. That's how it is, especially on college campuses in America. I just sincerely hope that we'll get to a point in which we'll have that younger generation coming back to some common sense and realizing that obviously the state of Israel is not perfect. By far, there's no country that is perfect on this world. But at the end of the day, it is the only country that it's going to protect them, regardless of their sexual orientation
or their political affiliation.
They're still going to be received in the land of Israel, in the state of Israel. And hopefully that is something that we can pass on and transmit, because I have to say, I'm very concerned when I see the statistics year after year, seeing how the younger generations of American Jews are getting further and further from Zionism.
So I'll ask you again, not about Jews, but other people who claim that they are anti-Zionists and they're making a distinction between that and anti-Semitism. Do you think that this is something that they believe, or do you think that this is a narrative that's created to obscure their truth?
Not easy. Not easy to answer, because I think generally that there are two groups. There are two groups of people in this. There are the anti-Zionists that they know exactly what they're talking about, and they know that their message is going to incite hate against the Jewish community here in the diaspora. And this mainly comes from the far left. In today's world, there's people who know exactly what they're saying when they speak. And we have many parliamentarians at the European Parliament here in Brussels that I could point to that are a prime example of that. But then we also have people that have listened to that narrative over and over and over. And because they didn't do their own research, they thought, okay, so that's the way it is. So I'm also an anti-Zionist. I personally detest social media in that sense, because it takes away from any sort of rational conversation between two human beings. So when you speak to them one by one in person, I think that if they're willing to listen, you can have that conversation and you may be surprised with the outcome. So I don't want to generalize and say everyone is an anti-Zionist and an anti-Semitic, because no, we need to go to the root of the problem and we need to see case by case. So I think that many people, the ones that are chanting on the streets, I think that there's a good amount of people that are doing it based on ignorance. I really do believe that. But at the same time, I do not deny, especially from certain political actors. For example, in my country, in Spain, last year, the vice president, Yolanda Díaz, the vice president of Spain, she sent a public message expressing her support towards the Palestinian people and what was happening in Gaza. You know, she concluded her message, and it was an institutional message with the Spanish and European flag behind her. You know, she ended it: from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. This is what the vice president of one of the most important countries in Europe, Spain, said on a public statement that was recorded, again, with the Spanish and European flag that in theory is supposed to promote certain values. So that is a main problem.
So I would like for you, because we have listeners of all different political persuasions, I would like for you to explain how you understand from the river to the sea, what that means. Is it about coexistence? What is, okay, we're laughing, but what is the message here?
No, for me, it's clear. And I always say it when I meet with the highest of government officials from all across the EU, it is one of the most anti-Semitic slogans and chants that exists in today's world. I mean, from the river, which river? Jordan River. To the sea, which sea? The Mediterranean Sea. It's a one-state solution. When people claim from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, they mean that they want to wipe off every single Jew from the land of Israel. That's exactly what it means. People say, no, that's not what I mean. Because, for example, the vice president of Spain, 24 hours later, we came out with a press release that we distributed amongst different media outlets. We were accusing her of anti-Semitism because this was blatant. It's not that we jump on the gun and we say, oh, everything's anti-Semitic. We're not like that. But this is a poignant case of blatant anti-Semitism. And she came out 24 hours later apologizing in her own way by saying, no, that's not what I meant. It was more about coexistence. Both people are free on that land. She was trying to retract, but it was too obvious that she knew what she was saying. And for me, it is one of those slogans that should be banned by law. For example, the Netherlands, especially after the November 7th pogrom of 2024, the government decided to pass a resolution. Now it's up to the prosecutor's office and to the Justice Department to see whether they're going to proceed or not. But at least the government passed a resolution saying that From the Root to the Sea was an anti-Semitic chant and slogan that should be completely banned. And I think that more governments should follow suit. But again, if you ask most of those people that are chanting that on the streets, the level of knowledge when it comes to basic geography, if you ask them about that, they wouldn't even know which river and which sea it is. Some of them they do, they're real anti-Semites. But the vast majority of them, they don't know what they're saying because they heard that and it sounds like a cool chant. Oh, yay, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. We're freedom fighters. So it sounds really cool. But when you get into it and you actually analyze a bit more, you realize how troubling that statement is.
I want to draw on your identity as a former Catholic and ask you what your thoughts are on the nativity scene that the Vatican released this past year, 2024. Can you share with us what that was and what your thoughts on that are?
As a full-fledged Jew, I felt extremely sad to begin with. And then as a former Catholic, I was profoundly disappointed because I think the Catholic Church in the past 60 years has done a pretty good job getting further and further away from that message of hate that they spread for 2,000 years with the whole concept of the D-side. I think it's how you say it in English. D-side of how...
the killing of God.
Exactly,
right?
exactly. So I think they've come to terms with their own history in that sense. I think the situation is much better than it used to be. But when I saw that scene of the Nativity with the keffiyeh, I don't believe when Pope Francis says that he was not aware. I don't believe that. Based on his statements in the past 2 years since the war started and knowing his political affiliation as well, he has never been the biggest fan of Israel. And also, it's just a clear distortion of history. That's what troubles me the most. It's not about just anti-Semitism. It's a distortion of history because how could Jesus be Palestinian and have a keffiyeh when Palestine didn't even exist? Or the land of Palestine that was renamed with the Romans? How could you say that? At the end of the day, Jesus was and died as a Jewish man. Whether you like it or not, that's history. So no, please, let's not do that. Let's study the facts. Let's know that there was Judea and Samaria. Let's learn about how that was founded and how it was Jewish land for 1,000 years. And then, after the second destruction of the temple with the Romans, the name of the land was renamed to Philistina, to Palestine. But before that, Jesus himself was a Jewish man.
You are very fortunate because when something like October 7th or November 7th, the pogrom in Amsterdam, occurs, you are able to get to work. You can channel some of that despair that a lot of us feel and know that you're going to continue to do something productive and proactive and positive. Are there times when you fall apart a little bit, when you think about the kind of work there is and the dehumanization of our brothers and sisters in Israel and everything that has happened?
Absolutely. There's been many moments because I'm a human being and I have my good and my bad days like anyone does. And there's been many moments of absolute despair since October the 7th in which, especially during the first couple of months, I thought, this is it. I'm making Aliyah and I'm done. I'm done with Europe. And not just with Europe, with the West overall. I'm just done with it. I'm fed up and I don't think the situation is going to get any better. And there are days that, I'm not going to lie, that it is very difficult to wake up and to leave bed. It is extremely difficult when you see not just what's happening in Israel, which as a proud Zionist, it's just heartbreaking, but also here in the diaspora. I mean, the situation right now, for example, in Australia. Australia is experiencing the worst wave of anti-Semitism in recent history. Every single week, we find out about something, attacks on schools, on Jewish institutions. Yesterday, the police discovered that they were about to blow a place. It was close to a Jewish synagogue, so they were planning on blowing it up. And it's just getting worse and worse. So when you see that, it's just so mentally exhausting and draining. So obviously, there are moments in which I feel like I just can't do it anymore. But I try to always see that when you fight for what you deem to be a right and fair and just cause, everything is worth it. Obviously, it takes a toll on you from an emotional and mental and even physical point of view when you're constantly traveling and working and not stopping and dealing with something that it's really sad. But when you fight for the right cause, that gives you strength. And I think that this cause, it's not just a cause against anti-Semitism, because what starts with the Jews never ends with the Jews. And this is what people need to see. The moment that there's an attack on the Jewish people, that subsequently is going to fall upon other minorities, and not just minorities, but against the rest of society. And then we see how the soul of humanity gets lost. So this is why we must keep doing what we do.
How are you managing not necessarily a newfound, but an increased sense of danger in your daily life here?
Well, since October the 7th, I'll give you a few examples of bad experiences that we've had. My sister was a prosecutor back in Spain. She told me that she thought it would be best because, in my case, I'm a bit more exposed. I give a lot of interviews, I give a lot of conferences. I just have a bit more of a public image in that sense, that it was best to remove the name out of my mailbox just in case. Or I removed my mezuzah after October the 7th, which I never thought I would have to do, but I did. I did put it inside of the house. The kippah, the Magen David, most of the times I was hiding it. That was throughout the first 9 months to a year. But now I don't do that anymore. I decided that I was not going to do it anymore because at the end of the day, of course, you have to be cautious. But at the same time, I'm not ask for forgiveness. I'm not going to apologize for anything wrong that I did. I didn't commit a crime. Because just like any person on the street walks with their cross, if they're Christians, or in the case of Muslims, with their different attires, they don't get attacked on the streets. I have that exact same right. I shouldn't have to apologize. That's part of living in a free society. We respect that everyone is different and they live according to different ways. But when we're in the public domain, we're respectful of each other's views. So obviously, as I mentioned before, the situation has deeply affected me because having to remove my mezuzah, which is one of the most important things in Judaism, was not easy. But that being said, that's a personal choice. Everyone decides what to do best. But in my case, a few months ago, after we hit that 1 year anniversary of October the 7th, I decided that I was not going to hide anymore.
Did you say that you were 27?
Yes.
You're young. I mean, I'm
Yes.
obviously also very young. But for me at 42 and for you at 27, we did not live through the Shoah. This is kind of a new chapter in Jewish history. Now you're in it. We're in it. You're working in it. And my question is, as a devout Jew, has this caused any shift in your faith or your practice?
Actually, it has not whatsoever. You would think that my faith would have trembled a bit, which is normal, by the way, when you see everything that is happening. I remember that one of the first things that my parents said to me, because as you know, my parents are not Jewish. One of the first things that they said to me was, why did you decide to embrace this journey? Why did you decide to go and be not just Jewish, but also an active Jew in your political work, in your media world with the interviews? Why did you decide to do that? And obviously, it's coming from a place of concern, as they're my parents or my sisters, my family. I completely understand. I would do the same. But as I explained to them, I just feel like that's my mission in this life. The moment that I decided to embrace my Jewish roots and come back to Judaism, and my faith, in my case, also because I'm religious and I'm a traditional person who keeps kosher. Also, now with Shabbat, I'm starting to get even more strict, and with keeping all the Hagim. I sincerely believe that in moments of despair, my faith has really kept me going, even though I might not understand everything. Deep down, I know somehow that there's a plan. That doesn't take away from the fact that I believe in free will and that we make our own paths. But as someone who believes in God, I really do believe that even though I might not see it or I might not understand it on the moment, within time, I will get to understand and to see. So in my case, my Jewish faith, and especially the communal aspect of the Jewish faith, being able to be in that keilah, in that sense of community, with other people that are going through the same exact thing, it is an indescribable feeling. obviously it's coming from a very sad place, but that gives me a lot more of hope in our people, in our destiny, and in that concept of Jewish unity that I strongly believe in, regardless of it being right wing, left wing, religious, not religious. And that is something that you see in Israel, by the way. The moment that we are united, no one and nothing can stop us.
I want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. We put this together very last minute, and it's so remarkable to sit here with you and hear all your perspectives.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. You're more than welcome to come back to Brussels. As we say, Leshana Laba Yerushalayim. Next time in Jerusalem, God willing, which is a much better place than Brussels, anyways.
But we can do Leshana Haba Brussels, perhaps.
with great pleasure. Thank you for everything.
Thank you. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, review, and subscribe to What Came After wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find us online at whatcameafter.com.
17, and here it goes now, rolls away now. And I've seen a lot, I think I've seen enough. I'd love someone to ponder with and wonder if 23 is gonna miss me. And it's a mystery where the years will go when all is said and done. When we're done, do we take them all or none? But can we all make a change now? Can we all make a change? And carry on our name now. Carry on our name. 24, and any day now, we see the rain clouds. I know December wind won't burn my candle out. I hold out, made that wish before. An open doors, I'm on the top, I'm on the bottom. It's not a problem, but it's the best of me that's ticking on a clock. I won't stop, bound to rise and fall. But can we all make a change now? Can we all make a change? And carry on our name now. Carry on our name. When I know the doors are open, they close and they open. The doors are open, stay close when they open. Again now, I let it come down, and the rain is painting colors all around my holy ground. All we have is here and now. Yeah, the doors are open, they close and they open. The doors are open, stay closed.